My name is Claire Bennett, and at 37 years old I discovered that my family had been planning my future without ever bothering to ask whether I wanted to be part of it. The morning everything started, my younger brother stood in my kitchen drinking coffee from a mug I had bought, inside a house I had paid for, and casually informed me that my parents had already promised my guest house to him and his fiancée after their wedding. He said it the way people talk about the weather, as though it were already settled, as though my opinion was a formality nobody needed to waste time collecting. The strangest part wasn't that he wanted it. The strangest part was that everyone else apparently believed it belonged to him already. 3 weeks later, my mother would stand in front of 50 relatives and accuse me of destroying the family. 10 minutes after that, she would learn that the land she had spent years trying to give away wasn't hers to promise. And by the end of that evening, the truth about a secret inheritance buried for nearly 20 years would leave half the family speechless. But none of us knew that yet. At the time, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, staring at my brother. "What do you mean you're moving into the guest house?" I asked. Ethan laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an embarrassed laugh. The kind of laugh people make when they think you're joking. "You know? After the wedding." I waited. He took another sip of coffee. "Mom already told you, didn't she?" No. Mom had not told me, because my mother never asked for permission when she could simply volunteer my life on my behalf. I set my plate down. "Ethan," I said carefully, "I own the guest house." His smile faded slightly. "Yeah. Technically." Technically. That word hung in the room. Technically I owned the guest house. Technically I owned the 6 acres surrounding it. Technically I paid every property tax bill. Technically I paid every maintenance invoice. Technically my name appeared on every legal document. And apparently all of that was less important than my brother wanting it. I wish I could say I was surprised. I wasn't. Because this story didn't begin in my kitchen. It began 20 years earlier, long before anyone decided what belonged to whom. Long before my brother learned that wanting something and deserving something were not the same thing. Long before my parents convinced themselves that my success meant I no longer needed fairness. I grew up in a small farming town called Ashford Ridge, the kind of place where everybody knew your grandparents, your mistakes, and your business before you did. My father owned a hardware store. My mother worked part-time at the church office. We weren't poor. We weren't wealthy. We were ordinary. At least we looked ordinary from the outside. Inside the house, things worked differently. Ethan was the dreamer. I was the worker. That was the family story. If Ethan forgot his homework, people laughed. If I forgot mine, people asked what was wrong with me. If Ethan failed, he needed support. If I succeeded, it was expected. Those rules stayed invisible for years because invisible rules are the hardest ones to fight. You don't notice them when you're young. You simply learn them. And eventually you start living inside them. By 18, I was working 2 jobs. By 22, I had finished college without help. By 28, I had built a successful commercial landscaping company from the ground up. By 37, I employed 32 people and managed contracts across 3 counties. My family still referred to my business as that lawn thing. They never asked how it worked. They never asked what I earned. They never asked how many people depended on me, but they always knew exactly when they needed money. My mother called it family helping family. Funny how that help only traveled in one direction. The property became part of my life 12 years earlier. My grandmother Evelyn died after a long illness. She left behind a neglected farmhouse, a guest house, and 6 acres of land on the edge of Willow Lake. Most of the family wanted to sell it. I bought their shares instead. Every one of them. Including my parents. Including Ethan's. I borrowed heavily, worked weekends, skipped vacations, spent years restoring buildings everyone else considered worthless. The guest house came first. Then the main house. Then the barn, piece by piece, board by board. I rebuilt the entire property. Not because it was profitable, because it mattered. It was the only place in my life that ever felt entirely mine, which is why hearing Ethan casually move into it without asking felt like somebody reaching into my chest and claiming ownership of my heartbeat. That afternoon I drove to my parents' house, the same white farmhouse where I grew up. The same porch where my mother had spent years deciding what was best for everyone else. I found her in the garden. She smiled when she saw me. Then she saw my face. The smile disappeared. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Ethan says he's moving into my guest house." A pause. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. The pause of somebody caught holding something they hoped wouldn't be discovered yet. "Oh." Just that. "Oh." No denial. No explanation. Just confirmation. "You really promised him my property," she sighed, theatrically, the way she always did before explaining why my feelings were inconvenient. "Claire, sweetheart, it's just the guest house." Just, the most dangerous word in my mother's vocabulary. Just a room. Just a loan. Just a favor. Just your weekend. Just your savings. Just your life, until enough justs become everything. It's not just a guest house. They're starting a family. So? She stared at me as though the answer were obvious. Because to her, it was. Because Ethan needed it. And I was Claire, the daughter who always managed. The daughter who always figured things out. The daughter who never asked anyone to save her, which somehow became permission to stop caring whether she needed saving. "Your brother needs help," she said softly. The sentence landed exactly where she intended, right in the place she'd spent decades training. Guilt. Obligation. Responsibility. The old buttons. The old levers. The old machinery. Except something had changed. For the first time in my life, the machine didn't start. I looked at my mother. Really looked, and I realized she wasn't asking. She was informing me. The decision had already been made. The discussion was only happening because I had accidentally discovered it early. And standing there in the garden surrounded by flowers I had helped pay for, I felt something inside me loosen, not break. Loosen, like a rope finally slipping free after years of tension. Did anyone think to ask me? My mother looked genuinely confused, as though the question itself were strange. And in that moment, I understood something. The problem wasn't that they didn't respect my answer. The problem was that they never considered I had one. I left without arguing, without shouting, without crying. My mother called after me. "Claire, don't make this into something bigger than it is." I didn't answer, because I already knew something she didn't. This wasn't becoming bigger. It had always been this big. I was only seeing it clearly for the first time. And before the summer was over, everyone else would see it too. For 3 days, nobody called. That alone should have told me something was wrong. Families like mine don't stay quiet unless they're planning something, hiding something, or waiting for somebody else to do the hard work for them. By Thursday evening, I knew which one it was. I was finishing estimates in my office when my cousin Rachel called. Rachel and I had always occupied a strange corner of the family. Close enough to know everything, far enough away to see it clearly. "Have you talked to your parents?" she asked. "No." A pause. "You might want to." I leaned back in my chair. "What happened?" Another pause. The kind people take when they're deciding whether telling the truth makes them part of the problem. Finally, she sighed. "They're already planning the wedding." "So?" "They've told everyone Ethan and Madison are moving into the guest house." I closed my eyes. Of course they had. The announcement hadn't been permission. It had been a completed transaction. At least in their minds. Who is everyone? Rachel laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it wasn't. "Claire, they told everybody. Church friends, neighbors, aunts, uncles. People I hadn't seen in years. Apparently half the county already believed Ethan's future address had been decided. And apparently I was the last person to hear about it. I thanked Rachel and hung up. Then I sat alone in my office staring out the window. Across the parking lot, 3 trucks bearing my company logo sat lined up beneath the evening sun. 32 employees, hundreds of completed projects. 12 years of work. Yet somehow, inside my family, I was still treated like a teenager, whose property required parental approval. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired. Deep tired. The kind that settles in your bones after carrying something for too long. That night, I started making a list. Not a revenge list, not a punishment list. A reality list. Every financial responsibility I quietly carried for somebody else. The list grew faster than I expected. My parents' health insurance supplement, the annual roof maintenance on their house, the property taxes on a parcel of land my father owned, the monthly payment on Ethan's work truck, the utility account for his apartment, the emergency fund my mother constantly borrowed from and never repaid. Line after line. Account after account. Commitment after commitment. None of them had happened all at once. That was the trick. Nobody asks for everything in a single day. They ask for a little. Then another little. Then another. Until eventually your entire life is supporting people who think they're standing on their own. I looked at the list. Then I closed my laptop. For the first time in years, I asked myself a question I should have asked long ago. What would happen if I stopped? The answer arrived sooner than expected. 2 days later, Ethan appeared at my office. Not because he wanted to apologize, not because he wanted to discuss the guest house, because his truck payment had bounced. He walked in carrying the confidence of a man who had never once considered hearing the word no. The payment didn't go through. I knew. I had canceled the automatic transfer 48 hours earlier. Okay. He blinked. Okay? Yes. Aren't you going to fix it? There it was. Not can you. Not would you. Aren't you? Like, fixing his problems was simply my natural function. Like gravity. Like electricity. Like weather. I folded my hands. No. The word landed between us. Heavy. Unfamiliar. He stared. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. His face reddened. You know I can't cover that right now. Then maybe you shouldn't have bought a truck you couldn't afford. The silence stretched. I don't think Ethan had ever heard accountability spoken out loud before. People usually softened it. Explained it. Apologized for it. I didn't, and that seemed to shock him more than anything. He left angry. Of course he did. People rarely appreciate boundaries they benefited from crossing. The phone calls started an hour later. First my mother. Then my father. Then Madison. Then my aunt. By dinner time, I had 16 missed calls. Apparently withdrawing financial support was less acceptable than giving away my property. Interesting. Very interesting. I ignored them all. The following week brought something worse. Something none of us expected. A lawyer's letter. At first I thought it was a mistake. The envelope arrived at my office. The return address belonged to a law firm 2 counties away. Inside sat a single document, a notice regarding future ownership rights connected to Willow Lake property holdings. I read it twice. Then 3 times. My stomach tightened, because there was a name on that document I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. My grandfather, Samuel Bennett, dead 19 years, and somehow connected to property documents being reviewed now. I called the attorney immediately. An hour later, I was sitting in his office, listening to a story nobody in my family had ever told me. When my grandparents purchased the Willow Lake property decades earlier, they created a trust. Not unusual. What was unusual was the final clause, a clause that had never been executed, never reviewed, never discussed, because everyone assumed it didn't matter. Until now, the attorney slid a copy across the table. I read the words slowly. Then again, then a third time. My grandfather had left specific instructions. If the property remained in family hands continuously for 20 years after his death, ownership rights to a substantial adjoining parcel would automatically transfer to the current primary property holder. My heart started beating faster. How substantial? The attorney gave a small smile. 42 acres. I thought I'd heard him wrong. 42? 42. 42 acres of undeveloped lakeside land. Land that had never been sold, never divided, never touched, land worth several $1,000,000. I sat there unable to speak. Because suddenly everything made sense. The timing. The pressure. The sudden obsession with my property. Somehow somebody else had discovered the clause too. And if Ethan moved into the guest house, if ownership changed, if family pressure forced me into restructuring the estate, the entire inheritance could shift. The attorney watched me carefully. Miss Bennett, has anybody recently expressed unusual interest in this property? I almost laughed. Unusual interest? My family had practically started assigning bedrooms. I left the office carrying copies of documents that changed everything. But the biggest surprise wasn't the land. It was the signature attached to an inquiry filed 6 months earlier. Someone had already been investigating the trust. Someone inside my family. The name sat at the bottom of the page. Harold Bennett. My father. I stared at it. Again. And again, my father knew. At least partially. He had known for months. And he had never said a word, not to me. Not to anyone. The drive home felt longer than usual. Questions crowded my head. How much did he know? How long had he known? And most importantly, was Ethan's wedding really about starting a family? Or was somebody trying to position themselves for a fortune they believed was about to appear? By the time I pulled into my driveway, darkness had settled over Willow Lake. The guest house sat silent beneath the trees, the porch light glowing softly. The same porch my brother believed already belonged to him. The same porch my mother had promised away. The same property hiding a secret worth millions. I stood there for a long time, looking at it, thinking, because for the first time I wasn't looking at a family disagreement. I was looking at a plan, and somebody had been working on that plan long before I discovered it. The question wasn't whether they were lying. The question was how much. And before this was over, I intended to find out. Every last piece. The wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in September. 300 guests. A lakeside ceremony. White tents. String lights. Enough flowers to stock a florist for a month. And according to my mother, it was going to be the happiest day in our family's history. The irony was almost impressive, because by then I knew exactly what had been happening. The attorney's investigation moved quickly, much faster than anyone expected. Apparently people leave trails when they think nobody is looking. Emails, messages, property inquiries, meeting notes, conversations with accountants. The deeper we dug, the clearer the picture became. 6 months earlier, my father discovered the trust clause, not by accident. A surveyor reviewing county records mentioned it during a routine boundary discussion. Dad investigated. Then told my mother. My mother told Ethan. And from that moment forward, the entire family started moving toward the same goal. Control the property. Control the future inheritance. Control me. Suddenly everything fit together. The pressure. The wedding timing. The guest house. The constant insistence that family should share everything. None of it was about family. It was about 42 acres. Millions of dollars hidden behind a legal clause nobody thought I would discover. The most painful part wasn't Ethan. It was my father. Because while my mother manipulated, and Ethan demanded, my father knew. And said nothing. The silence hurt more than the greed. A week before the wedding he called. For the first time in months. Claire. His voice sounded older, smaller. What do you want, Dad? A long pause. Then the truth. We made mistakes. Not we. They always say we when responsibility finally arrives. Nobody says we when they're spending the money. Nobody says we when they're making the plans. Only when consequences appear. We? Another silence. Then something unexpected happened. My father started crying. Not dramatically. Not loudly. The quiet crying of a man realizing he spent decades standing beside the wrong people. I should have stopped it. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Listening. I knew your mother was pushing too hard. I knew Ethan was getting entitled. I knew the property was yours. His voice cracked. And I kept telling myself I'd deal with it later. I closed my eyes, because that was my father. Always later, always tomorrow. Always eventually. Never now. And families can be destroyed by bad people. but they're just as often destroyed by good people who never speak. I can't fix this anymore, Dad. I know. For once, he sounded honest. I know. When the call ended, I sat alone for a long time. Then I went outside. The lake was calm. The guest house stood exactly where it always had. The land stretched beyond the trees. 42 hidden acres, waiting quietly. None of it felt like victory. It felt like clarity. And clarity can be painful. The wedding arrived beneath a perfect blue sky. The kind photographers love. The kind that makes people believe happy endings are guaranteed. Guests filled the property by noon. Cars lined the road. Music drifted through the trees. Relatives I hadn't seen in years wandered across the grounds. Most of them had no idea they were about to witness a family collapse. My mother looked radiant, confident, victorious. She moved through the crowd greeting people, accepting compliments, playing hostess, exactly the way she always had. Ethan looked nervous, not guilty, nervous. The difference matters. People who feel guilty understand what they've done. People who feel nervous are only afraid of being caught. The ceremony itself went smoothly. Beautiful, honestly. For a little while, I almost wished things were different. Almost. Then came the reception. And the speeches. My mother insisted on speaking first. Of course she did. She stood beneath the white tent smiling at the crowd, holding a champagne glass, basking in attention. My son has always had a generous heart, she said. Several guests nodded. And today marks the beginning of a beautiful future. More applause. She turned toward Ethan, then toward me. The smile sharpened, almost imperceptibly. But family is what makes that future possible. There it was. The setup. The performance. The pressure disguised as affection. I know some sacrifices are difficult, she continued, but sharing blessings is what family does. The crowd listened, unaware. My mother raised her glass, and I know Ethan and Madison will be very happy building their lives here on this property. Applause. Louder this time. Because everyone believed the story she'd spent months creating, the story where my land had already become Ethan's future. Then she sat down, satisfied, certain. The room buzzed with approval. And finally I stood. No anger, no shaking, no dramatic entrance. Just truth, the same truth she'd spent months trying to bury. I walked to the microphone. The room gradually quieted. My mother smiled confidently, still believing she controlled the narrative. Then I spoke. I think there are a few things everyone should know. Silence, not complete, but close. I've listened to a lot of conversations today about family. I looked around the tent, at cousins, friends, neighbors, people who deserved the truth. My grandparents purchased this property decades ago. Heads nodded. After my grandmother died, every family member sold their ownership share. More nodding. I bought every share. The room grew quieter. I paid every tax, every maintenance bill, every mortgage payment, every repair, every acre, every building, everything. The silence deepened. My mother's smile began fading. I continued. This property belongs to me. Now nobody moved. Not even the servers, not even the children, nothing. I never promised it to Ethan, I said. I never offered him the guest house. I never agreed to transfer ownership. Across the tent, my brother went pale. My mother looked stunned. The crowd started exchanging glances. Confused. Uncertain. I wasn't finished. 6 months ago, several members of my family discovered a trust clause connected to this land. Now people were paying attention. Real attention. The kind you can't fake. The clause grants ownership of an additional 42 acres. Gasps. Whispers. Shock. Exactly as I'd expected. Then I delivered the final truth. The reason my family suddenly became interested in my property wasn't because they wanted to help Ethan. I looked directly at my mother. It was because they wanted access to land worth millions. The tent exploded into murmurs, people turning, looking, questioning. My mother stood abruptly. That's not true. Her voice sounded desperate. Small. For the first time in my life, it is true. I held up copies of the documents. The attorneys confirmed everything. The room went completely silent. Then something happened nobody expected. My father stood, slowly, painfully, and said 5 words. Claire is telling the truth. The entire tent froze, including my mother, because after 38 years of silence, after decades of looking away, after an entire lifetime spent choosing peace over honesty, my father had finally spoken. The effect was devastating. Not because he yelled, because he didn't. Truth doesn't need volume when it finally arrives. My mother's face collapsed, not dramatically, not theatrically. The way buildings collapse after hidden damage finally reaches the surface. She sat down, speechless. Ethan looked at the floor. Madison started crying. Guests whispered. Relatives stared. The entire story my family had built cracked apart in less than 5 minutes, and beneath the wreckage sat the truth. Simple. Unavoidable. Documented. Real. The reception never fully recovered. People stayed. They ate. They danced. But the illusion was gone. And illusions never survive daylight. The following months brought consequences. Not revenge. Consequences. Very different things. My parents sold their house and moved into a smaller place. Ethan eventually found work in another state. The marriage survived. Surprisingly, though it looked very different afterward, the inheritance remained exactly where it belonged. The trust executed properly. The 42 acres transferred legally. No lawsuits, no settlements, no compromises. Just facts, the way things should have been from the beginning. As for me, I kept the property, the farmhouse, the guest house, the lake, the land. But the most important thing I kept wasn't any of that. It was my peace. For years I thought family meant carrying everyone, fixing everything, paying for everything, sacrificing everything. I was wrong. Family isn't ownership. It isn't obligation. It isn't permission for other people to spend your life for you. Family is respect. And without respect, all you have are relatives sharing the same last name. The guest house still stands where it always stood. The lake still reflects the sunset every evening, and sometimes I sit on the porch watching the light disappear across the water. Thinking about everything that happened. Thinking about my grandmother. Thinking about the years I spent trying to earn love that should never have required payment. And every time I do, I remember the lesson this entire story taught me. People will call you selfish the moment you stop letting them use you. Let them, because the people who truly love you never confuse boundaries with betrayal. For years, my family treated me like a resource, an account, a solution, a safety net. The day I stopped being those things, they finally had to see me as a person. And that changed everything. Not because I won, but because I finally stopped losing myself, trying to keep everyone else comfortable. That's the real inheritance. And unlike 42 acres of land, nobody can ever take it away. Would you like me to do anything else with Claire's story? Or do you have another one you'd like to share?